Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Addiction Help Podcast. Dan Hauser here, Jessica Miller there. We are your hosts today for another edition of the show where we talk about the latest in sports news and entertainment as it pertains to addiction recovery, and mental health. Jess, we got a pretty cool little episode today. We almost like story time today. We found a couple of cool stories in the news this past week as it pertained to kind of some things that are happening going on, particularly in the entertainment world. And so we're going to kind of talk about those today and loop them into addiction and addiction recovery. And
And for what
that's
it's worth, I have a story that I looked up that Dan doesn't know, and then Dan has something that he looked up that I have not read. So as you guys are kind of hearing this for the first time, we each are kind of hearing it for the first time too. We thought that would be fun for you guys.
absolutely, we try to keep things fun and spice up every once in a while. That's why we try to change up kind of the topics every week and whatnot. But Jess, let's just get right into the show this week. I will
Right.
give you the honors as far as
Ooh,
you getting to go first for your story. Story
yay.
time with Jess.
I actually used to do the story time when I worked at Barnes and Noble years ago. I would do the story time with the kids. So very different topic. Um, so today I want to tell you, Dan, and the rest of you guys about Elton John. So some of you may have seen that he was in the news recently because he just finished his huge 5-year farewell tour. And it was actually a lot longer than originally planned because of COVID. So he did take 2 years off, but it just finished this past week, I believe. So by the time you guys hear this, still relatively recent. And so why are we talking about Elton John in the context of addiction and recovery? Well, that's because Elton John has actually been sober for 23 years this month, in the month of July, actually. So July 30th is his um actually no, I am misspeaking. It is 33 years this year,
Oh wow!
actually.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, kudos to
Right?
Sir Elton.
Right? Isn't that incredible? So I did a
That's
little bit
great.
of reading kind of about his story and his recovery journey and everything. And some of the things that he shared I thought were kind of interesting. So for him in particular, he was pretty strongly addicted to cocaine and he is actually very open about his experience. So if you guys are interested and you wanted to learn more, there are so many interviews where he's quoted talking about different aspects of the addiction and recovery, but we are going to touch on some of the points today. So one of the things that he talks about is when he first got hooked, the very first time that he used cocaine, he said it was awful. He actually threw up and then he went right back and did more. And he says, looking back, that should have been an immediate red flag for me to realize maybe I am not normal and this is somewhat problematic. But for him, it was a very like a constant internal battle where you're ignoring that inner voice. And, he describes like different periods of his life where he would pass out or he would be having chest pains and people, at parties and things, they would put him to bed. And then 30 minutes later, he'd be up again doing more drugs. And so it wasn't until 1990 that, and a lot of articles talk about this, that it was 3 words that saved his life. And they were, I need help. And he, said the moment that I finally admitted that, just really admitted it to myself, I'd always kind of known it, but like rationalized different things or kind of shoved that voice in a corner. But once I finally really admitted that, that was the beginning of his recovery. And so July 30th, 1990 is his sobriety date. And he did actually post something really cool on July 30th, 2020. He had a 30 cake and called it, his sober birthday. And now, he talks a lot about in interviews that he's just honored to still be here. He says that, if I had not gotten sober when I did, I'd absolutely be dead by now, for sure. And now he says, I have this wonderful husband and I've gotten to do this incredible tour. They have 2 kids now, 2 boys. And so now that his tour is coming to a close, he said, it's been the privilege of my life, but I'm so excited for this next chapter that I get to now experience with my husband and my kid that like I wouldn't have any of this had I not just admitted that I need help. And I think that that's very cool because, like he's such an icon, Elton John, like even if you don't listen to his music or aren't necessarily familiar with a lot of, his albums and things, he's just an icon. People know who that is. And to hear somebody like that talk about the rock and roll life of, yeah, I was doing drugs and staying up all the time and yada, yada. And like supposedly the dream wasn't the dream. And I love that. The dream was actually like the life he's living now, which I think is pretty fabulous. So congrats to Elton John. And I'm sure, he'll happily be celebrating his 33rd sobriety birthday at the end of this month.
That's an awesome story. And one of the things that kind of, I guess you could say, caught my attention in the beginning of the story that kind of triggered something in my brain was you talked about how, he was doing it and it was causing a lot of issues. He was making him sick. It was making him not like the person he was. And he continued to keep doing it anyway, which is like a common like red flag sign of addiction. And we've talked about
Yep.
it a ton of times. You continue to go back to whatever the substance is, despite not only just the negative consequences, but the negative consequences. So like he knew it was making him sick. He knew it was making him throw up. He knew that it was making him pass out and have to get put to bed only to come back out 20 minutes later. Like he knew what these things really were and he continued to keep doing it. Of course, like you mentioned, until he realized that he needed help. But that was another thing is that he made that decision that he needed help. And maybe it took him a little bit longer than others might have wanted it to take, but he made that decision because you ultimately have to be the one to make that decision when it comes to deciding to go get help.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we talk about that a lot about how, you can't get sober for anybody other than yourself. And while you can be inspired by others, like when we did the, special about John Mulaney or about the show about his special rather, he said the same thing, it was fantastic of the people in his life to show up and hold him accountable and really sit him down and make him confront himself. But that's ultimately the key is, your support system can sort of hold up the mirror for you, but you're the one that still has to make that final decision ultimately to get help for yourself.
Absolutely. And kind of on that note, as far as, having a really adverse reaction to drugs and having it you know, nearly kill you almost, that kind of segues into my story time and the story that I found for this week. And that was actually, so this one was interesting when we kind of decided that we were going to go the route of let's kind of find some interesting topics in the news and within entertainment that, kind of ties everything together. I actually found a really, uh, I guess you could say startling, but also inspiring because of the end result story online on actress Tatum O'Neal. And it basically, she talks about her near death experience that she had almost 3 years ago as it pertains to drugs and drug abuse. So just kind of getting into some of the background of that for both you and the listeners. So in 2020, she nearly died of a drug overdose. She was on a combination of pain medications, opiates, and morphine.
Ooh.
And so what happened is she actually suffered a stroke and was in a coma for 6 weeks. And so 3 years later now, she's still slowly recovering from both the overdose, the addiction, and as well as the stroke. In fact, that she's still suffering from a lingering aphasia, I believe is how you pronounce it. And it's a language disorder that
Yeah.
stems from brain damage caused by a stroke.
Yeah. I
So,
think where, it's like, a word that you want to use, and then you sometimes insert the wrong word, like your brain gets, or you get tongue tied, or you can't think of the word at all. And I think that's what that is.
yeah, I believe so. I did a little bit of research into it. Yeah, it's basically, like I said, it's brain damage that's caused from
Yeah.
a stroke. So it can lead to a myriad of various uh, speaking issues and cognitive issues as a result of that. So for those that might be saying, well, who's Tatum O'Neal? Or for those of you might be saying, that name sounds familiar, but where might
Yeah.
I know her from? So,
Same.
yeah. So she actually, I mean, she's continued to act as she's gotten older too, but she was one of the original child stars of acting, I guess you could say. And so she started acting at a very young age, and at the age of 10, she actually won a Best Supporting Actress Oscar from the 1973 movie Paper Moon. So that's where she kind of got her fame. And she talks about how in her story, as far as because, and we'll get into this more in a minute, because these were, we talked about kind of like red flags of signs that, you know, maybe there are issues present or could be present in the future. That Oscar at the age of 10 actually caused a lot of issues within her family. Um, you know, success at a young age. I mean, we see it a lot with child actors and actresses, and they end up developing substance abuse issues. But for her specifically, she struggled with abuse and addiction in her teenage years. Like we mentioned, we see that a lot in child actors and actresses these days. Her mom had chronic drug and alcohol problems, and it actually got so bad to the point where she actually lost custody of Tatum and her brother. So at that point,
Wow.
they had to go live with their father. Their father wasn't exactly the poster child for health and wellness either. He abused drugs, and she suffered, as she tells it, from both physical and emotional abuse from him. She also chronicled about how she was molested by a drug dealer friend of her father when she was young as well too. So
Wow.
I bring all those things up because, and we talk about continued studying and research over the years, and studies have shown that I feel like today we kind of have a little bit better understanding of some of the underlying causes and factors that can lead to mental health issues and addiction more than we might have known 20 or 30 years ago. And just looking
Yeah.
over that
Oh, for
story, you
sure.
think of kind of some of the red flags like, okay, genetics. Both of her parents abuse drugs. And we know now for a fact that if you're one or more of your parents suffers from drug abuse or addiction, you are incredibly more likely to also then develop that same
Yep.
substance abuse disorder or a similar one. Mental health struggles leading to that. You know, we talk about how she
Trauma
was
too.
trauma. She was
Yep.
physically and mentally abused. That leads to trauma. You know, when people have underlying mental health causes like that, they tend to turn to drugs and alcohol at an early age as a way to self medicate because they either want to forget about what they dealt with, they don't want to think about it, they're not really sure how to deal with it. And so they do that because it makes them feel better. We talk
Elton,
about,
I just wanted to
oh, sorry.
insert real quick too,
Yeah.
just same track. I didn't go read a whole lot of detail, but I wasn't aware of this. I guess Elton John had an estranged relationship with his mother due to some trauma from his childhood, and so I mean that's a parallel right there as
Yeah.
well. And I thought, yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah, so it's just you know, and she talks about how, you know, her relationship with her father has improved now, but obviously,
Hmm.
you know, it got to basically got to a point where she nearly died to kind of have to almost wake up and realize, okay, well, not almost wake up, she basically did wake up from a coma and say, okay, yeah, I need to do
Yeah.
something about this.
Was she? Did it say whether or not she was like? Did she start specifically abusing opioids because she had a prescription, she had chronic pain or anything like that? Or was she already just seeking it out to just get high? Do you know?
So I didn't spot that in the article about any
Mm,
specifics about that. It talked about those were kind of the three specific things that she had been that she OD'd on, and
got
that,
it.
you know, she started abusing drugs, well, substances. She just started substance abuse and addiction issues early on as a teenager, which you have to think about the fact that she was basically getting passed around the mental and physical trauma she was going through, the things she was seeing as far as watching her mom get arrested for a DUI, losing
Yeah.
custody. Then she's got to go live with her dad. Her dad's got addiction problems. Your dad's drug dealer friends are coming around the house. You know, I mean, that's just, and you're also dealing with the pressures of being an Oscar winning actor at the
Yeah.
age of 10. Like, I just, yeah,
Any child star you hear about talks about it's just, whether they struggle with substance abuse as a way to cope or not, they all have talked about how challenging that world is as a kid. You're exposed to things that aren't appropriate. Of course, there are like creeps in the industry and stuff too, but there's also the aspect of like it is a grind. I recently read, what is it? I'm glad my mom died, or I'm glad my mother died by Jeanette McCurdy. Fantastic book, highly recommend. And she has kind of her own issues that she struggles with, having been a child star. She was on Nickelodeon's iCarly for a long time, and some other, she's done some other stuff too. And that's another similar story where that book really goes into the detail of how hard it is to be a kid because, like, you don't just show up on set and, like, you just get to be yourself and there's one take like we do with the podcast, usually, assuming everything goes okay and, the internet doesn't crash. Um, like it's grueling. You have to grind, you have to do all of these, like, you have to drive everywhere, you have to do all of these auditions and stuff. There's a lot of rejection involved in the industry constantly. So, I mean, that's hard enough for an adult. That's hard enough in, like, I remember in high school, I did theater and just auditioning for things here or there, simple high school plays. That's a lot. There's that rejection factor. So I can't imagine doing it as a profession at such a young age, at such a grueling pace. Like, no wonder a lot of these now adult have kind of trauma, honestly, from that life experience. It seems very rare to not, because you have to handle it just almost perfectly to get out unscathed.
And these child actors too, they are, they're children, they're child actors. So they are still developing, their minds are still developing, their bodies are still developing. They
Yep.
they are kind of at that age. I mean, most of us are still learning. I don't want to say the ropes, but we're still kind of learning like
Yeah.
how to behave in life.
How to
And
how to
so
be a
now,
person.
yeah. And so now, they're getting thrown into this very, very adult world at a very young age. And yeah, I mean, I'm sure that there are plenty of them whose parents are very active and whose parents are around a lot too. But for a lot of them, they talk about basically being influenced and kind of taught life through whether it's their adult actor counterparts on the shows, directors, producers, people who just are around sets. And yeah, while I'm not saying that this is the case on every set, I mean, in every walk of life, everywhere you go, you're going to have people that aren't, I guess you could say, the most responsible
Sure,
in the
yeah.
sense that, yeah. And we see it everywhere. And that's not a knock on them. They're just, they choose to live their life by doing what they do. And you're a
Right.
child actor at the age, and you might see this person, using drugs or drinking after, when they're done for the day, or they're going ahead and partying late in the night. And if you don't know any better because you've never experienced anything else in your life other than being in that environment, you might just assume, okay, this is what you do. We
Right.
record for we film for 12 hours a day, and then we go out and we drink and we do cocaine or whatever it is. And
Well,
so I
Daniel
think
Radcliffe talks about that too,
yeah.
in Harry Potter, where, like, he even says in a lot of that last final film, I'm drunk on, like, it's recorded, it's saved forever, because exactly what you said, he was in that environment and he, like, wanted to just be part of the gang. And so he fell into that habit.
And then a lot of them, what happens is once they leave that environment of acting and they kind of enter the quote unquote real world as adults, they then realize, oh, wow, not only is this not how life is, but this is really a really bad thing. And
This sucks.
I need to now go fix this and go get help, because this is not okay. This is not good. This is not how life should be. And so I think this is just another example. And I mean, the list, we could ramble off an extensive list of child actors who have dealt with substance abuse and addiction issues, in their younger years, and then kind of realized that they got older and had a better idea of the world as a whole, and not just that small little world of acting and the movie studio world. That's not how things actually operate in the rest of life.
Right. Right. Like,
But
what you're exposed to becomes your reality. And so how do you know any different? You don't know what you don't know.
well, and that brings me kind of into the next thing that I wanted to talk about, because we both kind of mentioned within the stories some common things to look out for as far as whether you or someone else may be struggling with addiction. And one of those things obviously is very much your environment you're in. If you're in an environment where drugs and alcohol are present openly and freely, and it's not like seen as taboo. Once again, if you don't know any better, you might just think, okay, this is what you do. and you do it. So that absolutely is a red flag. I touched on it a minute ago in the Tatum O'Neal story, but we talked about it. Genetics obviously is another big one. Trauma, mental abuse, underlying mental health conditions that you may not know about that exist. You touched on it in the Elton John article. Knowing that it's bad for you and continuing to do it anyway because you can't not do it. That's another kind of major red flag.
Well, like for
were there
me,
any?
we've talked about, my issue with alcohol abuse, and like for me, I knew this is not good. I need to cut back, and this is a common one too. Like, and I've talked to loved ones, even friends that have said like, "Oh man, yeah, I really need to cut back my drinking, but it's just so hard." And like that's a red flag, and that's not to shame them or indicate that I'm judging them in any way. That's very relatable because I experienced that as well, where it's that knowledge, like, you need to cut back, and maybe you've even tried to cut back, but you seem to be unable to, or you can't stick with it. Maybe you like it's, a bottle of wine a night and you're like, ooh, this is maybe I shouldn't be doing this. And so you go a few days without drinking, and then you find yourself back at the store getting a bottle of wine again a night. So like that's a warning sign. That's an issue. That's a concern.
But that even pertains to like my side of things, where you're talking about medical prescriptions and being, my ADD medication, the Xanax. Like, I knew I didn't like the way I felt on it, and I just kind of assumed for a really long time that that's just what I have to do in order
Too bad.
Yeah, it's like, okay, suck it up, buttercup. Like, you don't like the way you feel on it? Well, tough for you. Until one day I basically was like, well, maybe it isn't just tough luck and I got to suck it up. Maybe there are other ways that I can go about, not having to not like the way I feel and still be able to kind of function in society. But it took me 10 plus years, until I had gotten older, learned more about myself, learned more about my body, learned more about just life in general, to make that call.
Right. And I don't know, that kind of impresses me that you were able to be that introspective as a kid. Now that I think about that, you know what I mean? Cause like, that's
I
hard.
wasn't. I knew I didn't like the way I felt, but like I said, for the longest time, it was just like, okay, well, that's just what I have to deal with. It's just part of life. But then, yeah, I don't know. Just one day it was like, I don't want to do this anymore.
But what if, but what if not actually?
Yeah. Yeah.
But what if this is doo-doo and I don't want to do this anymore?
Yeah, exactly. Any other thoughts or anything else that kind of struck your attention? I guess you could say, whether it was about the Elton John article, the Tatum O'Neal article, as it pertains to kind of some common signs and red flags that we spot a lot of time when it comes to addiction and then addiction recovery.
Well, I actually kind of wanted to talk a little bit about why we, not just you and I for the show, but like people in general, why we talk about celebrities and addiction, because there is kind of a level of like, why do I care? Elton John is a millionaire and lives in his mansion. And like, how do you relate to that in a certain way? And I personally am not, I don't know, I'm not like not a fan of it. I just am neutral about, celebrities. They're just like us. Like, who cares, man? Like, yes, we all put on our pants one leg at a time kind of thing. So I like, there's a level of normalization and I guess the fine line between normalization of celebrities and then like putting them on a pedestal. It's just like, whatever, they're just people. But they are people that I think are almost like characters in a sense. They are people that we either grow up hearing about or are exposed to. And so they, I think, represent sort of a commonality amongst people. You and I have lived our separate lives and we didn't meet until we were, here in our 30s, but we can both relate on this aspect of, oh yeah, I've heard of Elton John. I know who that is. So it's like there's these common like figures. And in some ways, I think because of that, we can relate to them and relate to their experiences. So not to say like, oh, celebrities, they're just like us. Like they are, man. They're just people.
That's part of it, though. I think to an extent that seeing them in a vulnerable light, or seeing them in a vulnerable way, or seeing them in a way that we see ourselves, I think does humanize them a little more. Because I think, especially in this country, people like view celebrities as,
Yes.
they put them on this pedestal. They almost view them as other people. They don't kind of view them as just, yeah, at the end of the day, they still are a normal person. Yeah, they have a great gift or a great talent that has afforded them a lot of money and fame. But, with that also, listen, money doesn't always buy happiness. And I think you
No.
see a lot. Okay, great. Just because they have all this money, if anything, it just means that there is even more of a light being shined on them. And that can cause addiction and mental health struggles because it's like, sometimes they just want to be left alone and be a normal person and they're not. So
Yep,
to
bro.
there is
I could
there is
never. Ugh.
yeah, so I think there is a point of humanizing it. And also I think at the same time too, like I just said, we kind of put them on this pedestal and view them as almost holier than thou people type thing. So I feel like when you have a situation with an Elton John where now, 30, you said 33 years at the end of the month,
Mhm.
he's going to be
Yeah,
sober.
1990 was his sober year.
I think somebody who may be struggling can look at that story or listen to that story and say, you know what, if somebody like Elton John
Yeah,
dealt with the same issues that I did and went ahead and was able to get help, then why can't I also
right.
get
Right,
help?
somebody
So
with
I
all of
think it's
those
almost inspirational to an
resources,
extent. Yeah.
yeah, could still struggle, and I think that's really important. Somebody with all this fame and the seemingly perfect life, right? The things that, so, supposedly we should aspire to be or do or whatever, depending on who you are. And they still hit a rock bottom. They still struggled with mental health. They still came from, trauma and had to like break cycles and heal from those experiences. And I think that's the key. And so, I'm very excited for, when we finally do our, kick off our individual shows, because that's going to be what I'm going to be focusing on, is just talking to different people in the recovery world, because really everyone's got a story. But it is fabulous to be able to have these people in the limelight who are so open about their experiences to share them, because there are so many other people that um, they have similar stories but don't necessarily have that platform to share it on. And I know for myself, I love being able to relate to people, and if I can see myself in others and see how they solved a problem or how they got better, that's very inspiring to me. And I know certainly I'm not the only one. That's why these kinds of stories get published. They're interesting, they're inspiring, they help people.
And that's what it is to me. I think it is inspirational because and these celebrities they know that basically people hang on their every word and they have a platform that, talk about their platform that they have is just so much
Massive,
on a different
right?
level. Millions and millions of people hang on their every single word. So if they kind of take those words and use it as a way, or take that ability for people to truly listen to everything they have to say and use it to talk about, listen, I just like you, I wasn't okay. And I went and did this and I got myself the help that I needed. And now I'm 33 years sober and I've got a great husband and I've got a great life. And I go and I play my music and I go home at the end of the day and I feel good and I'm happy about who I am, both inside and outside, and the person that I am on a daily basis. And somebody may listen to that and say, I should go do that too.
Right,
Like,
I
not to say,
want that.
oh, Elton John told me to go get sober. No, it's not necessarily that. It's more of along the lines of,
Like,
I
here
guess a
was
way,
my misery and this is what it was like,
I
and now
guess a
look
way
at
I,
this is
yeah,
happy. Yes, yeah.
I guess a way I could compare that to is like, we've all done it. When you were a kid, your mom would tell you, don't do this or this is going to happen. And you're like, yeah, 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 mom, whatever.
Sure.
And then somebody else may say to you, whether it's a friend or somebody else, say, now, if you do this, something bad's going to happen. But then because it wasn't your mom saying it, you're like,
Yep,
oh, okay, yeah, you're right. So like,
yep.
it's not a direct comparison, but it's almost like, yeah, you could have friends or family say, hey, listen, you need to go get help. And you're just like, yeah, yeah, whatever. But then you hear Elton John's story, or you hear, Tatum O'Neal's story, or you hear John Mulaney's story, or you hear any celebrity story, and that might be what you needed to resonate with you to say, okay, yeah, you're right. I see myself in this. Let me get help now. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter who's the one telling you or what ends up clicking in your mind to get you to get the help. It's just that you're going to get help. So
Yeah,
I think it's just an example of the more people that can be open and honest about their struggles and let people know that it's okay not to be okay, and kind of destigmatize the whole mental health, addiction, recovery, everything involved in that. It just means that more people will then go get the help that they need. And I mean, and that's the thing that we do right here on this podcast. That's exactly what we're kind of talking about, every week here. So it's just another example of the more open and honest everyone can be, the better. And so these celebrities kind of talking about their struggles and saying, hey, listen, I used to not be okay, and this is what I did, and now I'm doing a lot better.
And right now
Is
it's my life is so much better. Yeah.
Yeah.
I also do love the juxtaposition between, again, they seem to live these glamorous lives where like they've got all this money and fame and attention and resources and blah blah blah, and then yet they're like, I was freaking miserable, so miserable, and this is getting rid of these things for me is what made it worthwhile to get out of bed every day. And I think that's what really gets people too is we idolize as a society. We have like celebrity worship, we idolize these people or we admire them for their talents or qualities or whatnot. And then when we see them saying, yeah, I had all this stuff that you think was great, but it actually super sucked. And this is what really actually makes me happy, or now I can actually enjoy some of those things. Now I think that that's a really key message there too.
I think too, and this just kind of popped in my head, in the case of Elton John specifically, that kind of rock and roll culture and rock and roll lifestyle is very much, and we talked about it with the music festival thing too. It's very much associated with partying and drugs and abusing substances, and because that just is kind of what previous generations of these rock stars, and Elton John being in that age group of them, did.
Mhm.
So I think too, for him to say, hey, listen, like, I did those things and it wasn't good for me, but now I'm not doing those things anymore, and I'm still just as successful in my career, but I'm also happier as a human being. Like, it
Yeah.
reminds people that even if you did start at a young age and you think that you have to be doing these things in order to be successful because that's what your brain thinks now, like, not that you can continue to have a successful life without that as well too. That's
Yeah.
not catalyst to everything that had come before it.
Completely agree.
But on that note, that will wrap it up for this week's edition of the Addiction Help podcast. As always, thank you to everyone for continuing to listen along or watch along with us. Please, as always, continue to like, subscribe, rate, and review wherever you may be watching or listening to us. Keep sending in those questions. We would love to do another one of these mailbag episodes in the next couple weeks. So please continue to send in questions as we're kind of compiling the ones we already have so we can do another one of those shows. Continue to share your thoughts with us, leave reviews. Like I mentioned, share with us what you like, what you maybe don't like. It's okay. We're open and for constructive
We're
criticism on
thick-skinned.
this show. Yeah, I mean, with all the stuff we talk about, we kind of have to be. But also, if
True.
there's any topics that you want us to talk about, like, in the case of this week, we just kind of were doing some research and came across these news articles. So if there's something you come across of in your daily life, so to say, of whatever you do, please send them our way. We'll absolutely read them over and talk about them on the show. So we're always happy to involve the listeners in the show because it means you guys are participating as well, and that's what we want. So, and of course, as I like to say every week too, it's okay not to be okay. And if you do need help, if you are struggling with substance abuse, addiction, or mental health, help is always available for you or a loved one. Findtreatment.gov is a great place to find treatment options in your area. There's also the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration toll-free helpline, which is 1-800-662-4357. That's 1-800-662-4357. And of course, addictionhelp.com, where you can find all the great work that Jess does over there with all her great resource pages and providing vital information for those who may be wanting to know more information for a loved one or for themselves or anything that they can do to get help. And that will do it for today's show. Thank you all again for listening, and we hope you guys have a great week, and we will talk to you all next week. Have a great
Bye,
week,
guys.
everybody.
Thank you.
See you.